I saw something today that's maybe worse than anything. President Xi of China, I know him well, and President Putin of Russia, I know him well. They're right now together working on plans where they combine, where they get together and do damage, because that's ultimately what they're thinking about, doing damage. And you take a look at what President Xi said today. He fully expects to take Taiwan. He made that statement today. That's a big statement.
And that was former President Trump yesterday on Russian President Vladimir Putin's two-day state visit to China. He had meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Xi and Putin pledged a, quote, new era, vowing to deepen the strategic partnership between their nations. Today, Putin is talking about trade and cultural exchanges as he visits the city of Harbin, once known as Little Moscow, for a China-Russia trade fair. Joining me right now is Hudson Institute Senior Fellow, Atlas Organization founder, and the author of China's Vision of Victory, Jonathan D.T. Ward, back with me. Jonathan, great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for weighing in on this. What do you make of Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin strengthening their partnership, talking now about trade and cultural things that are shared between the nations? Your thoughts?
Well, look, Maria, I mean, this is the real thing. I mean, forget about the trade and cultural stuff. I mean, they are building a military partnership. I mean, Russia has initiated a war in Europe with the full force of China's economy behind it. I mean, China has kept them afloat. They've rebuilt the military-industrial base. And what's going on in China right now is essentially the entire Russian government is in China. I mean, it's not just Putin. It's the foreign minister, it's the defense minister, it's the finance minister, it's the central bank head, and then they've also brought the heads of Russia's major banks and energy corporations. So you've basically brought a very significant delegation. I mean, on one hand, they're celebrating the 75th anniversary of Russia-China ties in the modern era, so Soviet Union, People's Republic of China. But bottom line, I mean, this is these are our real adversaries, and I think it's time for China to pay for its relationship with Russia, for its support for Putin, for its support for the invasion of Ukraine. I mean, all of that never would have happened without China's support. And I think we can open up an entire front of economic action on China here. I mean, basically any, I would say, Chinese corporation or economic entity that has touched these meetings with Russia should be targeted by U.S. and allied sanctions. And it's important for the Europeans to realize, as I think they're starting to do, that China is really backing this war in Europe, and it's time for us to operate as an alliance system and start to really strike deep into the Chinese economy. And I think you start with the banking sector. It would be, in my view, I mean, you're talking about Russian banks here, like VTB, that has OFAC's full blocking sanctions on it, and they're over there meeting with the Chinese. And, you know, I think we should go after a couple of the big Chinese banks and really rattle the cage here. And furthermore, I mean, on this visit, I mean, the joint statement that they issued, which is the most significant one since the actual no limits declaration in 2022, just before the invasion of Ukraine. I mean, they've talked about deepening this partnership and saying we intend to increase interaction and tighten coordination in order to counter Washington's destructive and hostile course towards so-called dual containment of our countries. Well, look, containment of Russia and China is the right strategy. It works, it wins, and we need to actually do it. China's been providing Russia with, you know, essentially all kinds of you know, hardware, trade backing, et cetera, to wage its war, and they're here coordinating together. So I think it's time for us to strike back.
Well, when you say strike back, I mean, is that what that strike would be? Sanctions? What do you make of President Biden coming out with these tariffs in the last week, talking about tariffs on things like, you know, steel, on things like EVs? Is that enough, or what else should be done? Because that's absolutely not enough right now. Exactly. I mean, so go ahead, tell me.
Well, sure. I mean, those sanctions, which I do think are significant. I mean, I think it's important that they've gone after a range of strategic industries here, and you know, most importantly, by having sanctions that are being phased, tariffs that are being phased in. I mean, they can indicate to American C-suites and boards the direction of the U.S.-China trading relationship and cause businesses, I think, to make new decisions. But I think here, when you're talking about the direct geopolitical support for Putin's war in Ukraine and the fact that we've given China an absolutely free pass on that, and by the way, the trade statistics you're showing with China here have gone down substantially. We're at about 550 billion. I mean, here it's showing 575 billion, down from much, much higher levels of trade in the past few years. So I think we have to continue to, put downward pressure on the trading relationships, start to actually do the separation of the economies, do it across the alliance system. I mean, if you cut down China's balance of trade with the free world, I mean, that does a lot to slow their economy down, to, sort of take the wind out of the sails of their geopolitical project. But what I mean here principally is consequences, economic consequences for their support for Putin. I mean, they've had a lot of warnings, but I think you're taking this entire delegation, which is an economic and trading delegation. I mean, forget about the cultural stuff. This is about military activity and economic integration of America's two foremost adversaries. And they just changed their defense minister and replaced him with a pretty experienced economist who's had all kinds of economic portfolios in his time serving in the Russian government. So I think it makes pretty clear that they're going to work on integrating their two economies for a long conflict with the United States. And furthermore, in these statements, Maria, I mean, they talk about, China's support for Russia and Europe and Russia's support for China in the Pacific and on Taiwan. So that's where this is going. And I think we need to demonstrate economic force on some of the Chinese entities that are working with the Russians this closely.
So Xi Jinping's government announced its most forceful attempt to sort of rescue its economy and that Chinese property market. It's relaxing mortgage rules and urging local governments to buy unsold homes. Authorities are, concerned about that impact on economic growth. They're trying to end this property crisis. There's that going on. But I think some corporations are actually getting it. I mean, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Microsoft is asking hundreds of China-based AI staff to consider relocating out of China because of the U.S.-China tensions. They write this: staff, mostly engineers with Chinese nationality, were recently offered the opportunity to transfer to countries including the U.S., Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand, and that about 700 to 800 people were given that offer. Jonathan, your reaction to what Microsoft is saying now? You see pockets of corporate America getting it, understanding the threat of communist China and either moving their people out, looking for an alternative in terms of supply chains, or basically saying, look, we're not going, like a Greg Brown from Motorola Solutions, who I had on last week, said, they can run, but they can't hide. I'm not going to, roll over for the Chinese Communist Party that continues to steal intellectual property.
Well, sure, and it's it's pockets, Maria. I think there are plenty of CEOs that still aren't making these sorts of moves. Very few really. But the move from Microsoft, I think, is important because it also shows one of the key features of what it's going to take for companies to reposition and reorient. I mean, it's not just going to be about moving supply chains. It's going to be about moving staff, really moving business units, trying to get things out of harm's way. And I think any CEO or business leader that is really watching what's going on between Russia and China right now, that should be enough for you to understand where geopolitics are really going. I mean, this is not going to be solved by more meetings between, the U.S. cabinet and Xi Jinping. I mean, what they're doing is very clear. So I think we need to have companies moving out of harm's way. We need to have shareholders telling companies, or at least accepting better corporate strategy and realizing that, companies are going to be right in the center of this situation. And I think the Wall Street Journal article, hinted at that very strongly, saying that companies are going to be collateral damage in the U.S.-China relationship. And you and I have been talking about that for a very long time. I mean, that's true. I think that the real concern here is that we have a market event, I think, where you have a lot of American businesses that do not understand where geopolitics is really headed, and their businesses do not come back. I mean, you think about how many business units were lost in Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. I mean, what would happen in China if they can't get themselves out of harm's way would be far more significant for the U.S. markets and the U.S. economy. So I think they need to act now and get moving, get the supply chains moving, et cetera, get the staff moving. Exactly.
It's a long time coming. We've been talking about this for a long time. We'll see if others follow suit. Jonathan, good to see you as always. Thank you.
Thank you,
Jonathan D.T. Ward. We'll be right back.